Hi everyone, Serenity here, and welcome back to another Brutal Critique. And, well, I'd like to have people, first and foremost, understand something very quickly. I want people to give me feedback and opinions to challenge my ideas and to challenge this whole concept, I guess, of what I'm about to go into. I really hate the idea of living in my own echo chamber, surrounded by people who have the same opinions as me. I do like to challenge this, and I don't want it to be an argument. I would like this to be, in a way, a discussion. Because I love Final Fantasy. I have loved Final Fantasy for many, many years, and I've grown up on it. And I think things like this discussion can help the series expand in some ways, and obviously, not directly, but it is those opinions being out there that I think are quite important. Now, to sort of nullify things, I guess, and to add on to the whole message of the video, I will say that the Final Fantasy community are very, very hate-filled sometimes, especially around this topic. And for people who genuinely want to have a debate and genuinely are supportive people, I guess, of Final Fantasy, I would ask that you like the video, and I really hate to ask that. I do sincerely hate it, but as you can imagine, these videos do take fucking loads of effort. Like, not only the sitting down, recording and scripting, and the massive amounts of editing that goes into them, but yeah, this is something that I'm kind of having to do with this one specifically because I feel like this video is going to get a lot of hatred. And let's get on with something. I don't hate Final Fantasy 15. I actually really enjoy it. And for all intents and purposes, I wanted to get that out of the way right now. But I feel like the people who defend it like it's the best thing that's ever happened, and it can do no wrong, are the types of people that live inside that little echo chamber. Now, I'm not going to make people's heart race by saying that I absolutely adore DLC. I honestly think DLC is one of the best things to come to gaming. I honestly don't think that there are many things that have drastically changed the games industry in the last 20 or 30 years that have been anywhere near as important as DLC has been. I also want to mention that I think that Final Fantasy 15 is actually the exact way the franchise should be going. I think the evolution is completely logical. Not only the combat system, but the characters and the fantasy side of it. Mixing the reality of the horrific world we actually live in, along with a fantasy story, really can do wonders for storytelling. And it really made me feel like I was playing a Final Fantasy game for the first time in a while. I am someone that actually liked Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2, and then Shightening came along, or Shightening Returns, sorry, and it really did, spill that pot of milk for me. I just couldn't really get on with that game. And I will say that Final Fantasy X is my favourite game, so Final Fantasy 15 having similar story in some ways was a bit give or take, and so that's sort of where I lie when it comes to the, I guess, game in general, or the series in general. Now, if you've been paying attention, I did say that this video is going to get a lot of hate. Now, the reason I believe that is because of the opinion that I'm about to share surrounding Final Fantasy 15 and the new DLCs. Which, the reason this video is kind of being made is because recently a new season pass was announced about 3-4 weeks ago, I think it was. And in there was episode Noctis. Now, this has turned one of the biggest arguments that people normally throw at me the moment I say that DLC did in fact ruin what this game could have potentially been. Because they would always say, nothing mattered, the side content doesn't matter because the story was completely driven from Noctis' point of view. So the side stuff not being there and being sold as DLC made complete sense. But now they're saying, you don't know what that episode is going to be. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be part of the main story, so you're wrong, fuck you. Rather than giving a, logical and sound answer. And for the record, I brought the £60 version, or £69 version, I think, which was the deluxe edition, and that didn't even come with the fucking season pass. Like, really? this deluxe edition. Now, apparently, where they kind of, in a way, scammed people with this, which was one of the very big first controversial things that a lot of people don't know, that in the UK, game retailers sold the deluxe edition for £60, and their online stores also sold the deluxe edition for £60. Now, the biggest thing about the deluxe edition was the season pass, or the steel box. So, obviously, the digital deluxe edition can't have a steel box, so it gave the season pass. But because there was a steel box with the deluxe edition in stores, which I'm someone that loves having physical copies of things, and I'm a huge fucking nerd for steel boxes especially, bury me in one, please. Or cremate me, I don't really care. There was a very annoyed majority of people that understandably read that the deluxe edition that they're paying quite a bit of money for would have the season pass in it, and then actually they were paying £20 for the addition of a steel box, when people who were paying the same price got the full game plus the DLC. Now, I know some people will say, oh, well, your opinion was already biased at that point about the DLC being bad. No, it wasn't. It really, really wasn't. I already knew the DLC was going to be a problem, for the same reason I know DLC is going to be a problem in other franchises, a bit like Destiny 2, which I make videos about, a bit like Call of Duty, which I might make videos about, I'm not 100% sure yet. There are levels of DLC that are acceptable to me, and that is what DLC originally was. DLC was this way of fixing things that might necessarily be in massive games, because games are a lot bigger nowadays, and they're a lot more difficult to make in terms of the way systems work, and how to integrate between multiple platforms, multiple countries, etc, etc. A lot of people don't know how difficult in comparison to, well, back in the day. Even though back in the day the modeling and optimization was a lot harder, the actual process of getting it onto a cartridge and having it basically ready to go, glitches and stuff like that were just expected. There was no way of saying, oh, I want you to patch this out immediately. Nowadays there is a lot more pressure on the company to ship a game and to constantly be maintaining it with updates, which is something that does come with the modern industry. And it isn't my tainted view because of me not getting the season pass. I would have liked the season pass. I pre-ordered it to get the season pass because I thought the side content would be interesting, and I play everything Final Fantasy. But this is the first time that I've actually gone out of my way to not buy it, and I still haven't played the episodes because I refuse to pay extra money for something that A, I technically already kind of paid for, and B, something that kind of should have been in the base game in my opinion to begin with. But that is something I'm going to try and argue across, and, well, not argue, as I said, not an argument, debate, but this is something I'm going to try and debate and push out there, and I think I have some really good points that people are going to find hard to discredit, and I think some of these points people, no matter what, will discredit. So always take that with a pinch of salt if you're talking to people in the comments. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, I really once again want to absolutely make sure that you understand I love DLC. And I do think it is one of the greatest things to come to gaming. And I know I've said that quite a few times already, but I really need to grind that into people, because it's one of the arguments that people will always say is just because you don't like DLC. And before you DLC hating Johnnies that want to jump down my throat like the world's most enthusiastic throat lozenge, let me explain. Back when I was growing up, as I said, games were very different. They had to perform out of the gate, and any glitches you could not expect there to be any fixes for. And it was, in a way, what almost completely fucked up the games industry. Something like E.T. for the Atari could never happen in a modern game setting. The closest thing we get is basically Ride to Hell Retributions, where it is such a mess that it's fucking hilarious. Like, honestly, I would say buy that game just because of how much of a mess it is. It's like getting a ticket to a freak show. Not to mention that not only did it have an effect on the gamer, if you fucked up, boom, your company is fucked big time. And Atari was a really good example of this. It really struggled to survive. Look up Atari ET, you will fucking love it. It did nearly kill gaming as a medium, especially as a console medium. Fucking good times. That was 11 years before I was even squirted into someone's cunt, so it wasn't something that I personally went through. But there were games like Banjo-Kazooie, Spyro, Conker's Bad Fur Day that I did grow up with, and there were so many other games, and of course, even Final Fantasy. Yes, lots of games these days do get things like day one patches that I personally think should never be a fucking thing. I think a day one patch really shows that a process was rushed or something has gone very wrong along the pipeline, which is always something that I just can't get my head around. But this is going to be a very long, and I'm going to do my best to actually research everything I'm talking about before, which I already kind of have, and put forward everything as some facts, and there are going to be some theories in here that, once again, the theory-based stuff is a very important part of games like Final Fantasy, and I do think that having some things left up to the imagination are extremely important, but more on that later. I would suggest you grab yourself a drink, take a piss, do anything you need to do, because this is going to be a long one, and it's going to have a lot of venting in it. So let me set you straight. Everything I say from here on out, I want you to understand, is coming from a Final Fantasy fucking fanboy. And that, as I said, I love Final Fantasy 15, and definitely think it's where the series should be going. The world felt absolutely amazing. The combat looked and felt fantastic. The magic system looked and, in a way, did feel amazing, but at the same time it was kind of hot garbage. It did break the game in many different ways, but it looked amazing. Now, before you say you don't know how to use the magic system, I do, and it was very easy to abuse, and there was never anything in the game that I really heavily felt like I needed to use it on, or that it was going to actually improve the fight. All it ever really did is get rid of my frame-perfect combos with the other characters, so all round, it can really go in the fucking bin. The ring was an awesome endgame power, and I've heard since I last played, especially with the introduction of New Game Plus, it can even kill the biggest bosses, which is absolutely fucking awesome, if you're a pleb. But I'm trying not to piss people off, but I'm guessing I am pissing people off, and that's me being a bit of a Pablo. Remember, kids, if you ever feel like a cunt, you're probably being a Pablo. And only like 2 people will understand what I mean by that, but they're people from the Final Fantasy fan page. And yeah, there was an arsehole in there called Pablo. And he was an asshole. Don't be a Pablo, people. That sounds really racist now that I think about it. I'm not being racist. Pablo's just an ass. So now that it's firmly set in stone that I want to pin Final Fantasy V down for some sloppy makeouts, I love it better than most Final Fantasies that have come out in the last couple of years, especially since Final Fantasy X. And as a product, as a standalone, honestly, I think it's fucking terrible. It boasts on the outset of the very first Final Fantasy for new and old fans, but I don't think it is. I personally think it's more for people like me, the like fat, nearly dead neckbeards. I mean, extremely handsome, well-endowed sex machines. I wanted this game to be good, and I went into this game blind to make sure that I had nothing tainting my view of it. I didn't watch Kingsglaive, I didn't watch the anime. I didn't go in completely blind, obviously. I watched trailers. I'm not fucking Ignis. Oh, shit, spoilers. And I enjoyed it. I did really enjoy it. But the very fact is, it's just not a very fleshed out game. Let's harp on the people's opinion of it's meant to be from Noctis's point of view. So fleshing out the other characters makes no sense. If I have to explain why giving characters goals, good backgrounds, and adversities on screen for us to witness and take part in is good storytelling, I honestly don't understand how you enjoy any other game, because by that logic, you must think almost any character development is filler. Development must feel like just pure garbage to you. I just can't see how you would have that mentality. That's not to say you have to see everything about a character, no, not at all. But the very fact is, if you look at, let's say, Luna Freya, I can tell you her death was a fantastic cinematic moment. The fight was fun, not as fun as it could have been, and not as fun as it was advertised to look, But nevertheless, it was fun, and she was killed. And that's it. Now, to address the issue, I'm aware they've patched in 3 scenes with her after her death, but honestly, one of them is so fucking token, I can't believe anyone okayed the idea. The other, oh my god, just proves my point even more, just absolutely massively proves my point at how effective character development can and needs to be. But I will get onto that in a paragraph or two. She needed 1 or 2 hours extra in the game. Maybe we could have gone on a date with her, get to know her quirks as a character, watch her do things with Noctis. I don't know, get a little ice cream on her nose. Noctis, wipes off his finger and licks it, the whole anime thing, like, egg you. Then she gets fucking stabbed in the stomach, and our heart plunges into the depths of depression along with Noctis. Now, if you were like me, you probably hadn't replayed the game in a very long time. I actually did replay it for this review, and I will say the added scenes did bring a lot to the game. Now, the scene I'm going to talk about here, honestly, will either completely bring you to my side, or it will show that you're never going to change your mind on this subject. This scene fucking broke me, and it put something in the game that I think was missed from the plot completely. This arranged marriage is not typical. This is true love. The passion that they felt for each other, the friendship they garnered in their childhood, and actually allowed each other to kind of fall in love. When Arden approached in Kingsglaive saying he wants his son to marry Lady Lunafreya, it was a shocking moment for him, but as I said, I went into it blind, so I'm trying to not count things like Kingsglaive into it, but I will say, considering it came with my version of the game rather than a season pass, there is things like that that I do think are very, very important. But unlike a lot of arranged marriages, there was love there. There was a lot of love. But you never really saw that on screen. You never felt that. You had more emotional connection to Umbra. And Umbra, yes, was a messenger between Luna and Noctis, but it was like watching a 15-year-old flirt with someone on MSN. It was just a bit cringy and awkward when he was trying to write down things without his friends seeing. And I like that. I do really like that, because I think it speaks volumes about Noctis' character, that he is trying very hard to keep up this facade of I don't really care that much, but he absolutely loves Luna.
Sister, cease this madness. That boy will never be king.
Noctis is chosen. It is ordained. You of all people should know.
I know that you are throwing your life away.
That may be. But it's my choice. If only... If only I could hear his voice once more. If we could laugh together as we did as children. If we could live out our days together as we once dreamed.
Wherefore does the lady weep?
Forgive me. I vowed to only cry where prying eyes cannot see the tears in mine.
Yet others need not hide their grief. Is she so different from them?
No. She is no different at all. She wants exactly what they do. To be with the one she loves. But want though she may, it is not to be.
The lady's thoughts have been hurt. The love she bears the king shall never fade. And, in time, her feelings shall be known unto him.
Gentiana.
And if the words are not spoken from her lips, then the messengers shall see that they are heard. The god's favor and the lady's love shall be with him evermore. Thus it is promised between the Oracle and her familiar.
I am undeserving of your kindness. Thank you.
And so the promise is fulfilled. As her words go with him, so shall my blessing.
Yeah. Thanks.
The level of passion and confusion in this scene was absolutely phenomenal, and if you've ever lost someone, you know what Luna is feeling. That your breath isn't coming out properly, all your motor functions are being overwhelmed by this ocean of emotion that is just racing through your body. Every regret, pain, anger, things you didn't say, it is all hitting you at this one moment. Now, I will describe something here that only people who have felt it will kind of understand, and what she is feeling in general. Your eyes kind of shake with regret and pain and anger. It really swells up in you, as if you're kind of behind your eyes looking out. You're not in control of yourself anymore. This pain is happening to you, and you cannot physically deal with it. It's just not possible. And a really good example of this is the way she reacts. If we could laugh together as we did as children. And the pain hits her again. The realization, if I could live our days out together like we once dreamed. Like, fucking Christ, that is just so horrible. But that is what happens. It's distancing yourself from the pain by trying to put something there to focus on, or try and think about a reality or a possibility, I guess. And it is really impossible to describe. Unless you have lived through it, it is something you can only really witness. It's horrible. And for the people that understand how she felt, I'm sorry for whatever the fuck happened to you. But I think you can agree with me that this scene should have been in the base game, and the opinions on Luna Freya being this bland two-dimensional character would have been completely mute. They add so much in this one scene. Watching Luna get some form of closure from Gentiana, telling Luna that Noctis knows her love is with him, and that the same feeling is in return. What people don't understand about the scene is this is the first time we see Luna as she is. She is a 24-year-old woman who had the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was an oracle that had to heal and bless people. She even assures her people that her marriage will not get in the way of her duty as an oracle on the radio.
You will find me in your towns and villages, as you always have.
How fucked is that? That people are annoyed or nervous that your wedding will get in the ways of your duty? She then had to die to restore some form of balance to the world. Imagine that, just being so young, having to go through what she did, having no choices in life, only to die the moment she gets the one person she truly, truly loved in her life right in front of her, just to have it all taken away. Her life was short. It was like a breath on a mirror, and a fragment of what it should and could have been. She never got to live for herself. The only thing she wanted to live for was Noctis at that point. The one thing she loved, the one choice that she could make herself, was to love him and to die for him. And in the first 24 years of her life, that was probably the first choice that she ever truly made herself. And it's the choice that led her to die. So please, I would love for people to explain how that is not important to the story, and how you don't think that that would have improved Noctis' story and the entire game overall. Now, I know what some people will say, well, that came as a free update rather than a paid DLC. But that's not really important here. The fact is that work was being done, even if it was by a separate team, on DLC, when something like that so important, so emotionally impactful scene was put on the sidelines and wasn't out until the game had already completely run its course for most people who were going to only play the base game. Which, if this was a Final Fantasy for the new age, to make new fans, then what it's really done is done a disservice by alienating people and making them think, oh, well, that was a bit naff, rather than this amazing emotional experience. They're not going to come back like I did 6 to 8 months later. They're not going to come back 2 years later. They're not going to come back at all. And it's going to mean they probably won't buy the next game that comes out. See, the problem a lot of people have with the DLC is not that it exists, it's that the rest of the game didn't feel fleshed out enough for them to be working on DLC, even if it was another team. And I do understand how the industry works, before someone tries to tell me how the industry works. I have aimed my entire life at this industry, so I get the little nitty-gritty things. And I may have never worked on a main game or DLC, but I do get that there are project managers that do separate teams, and to be honest, if this game is anything, it was something horrifically mismanaged. This game started out as Final Fantasy Versus when I was like 15, and hadn't come out for like 10 years. And some people will say, actually it didn't have a like 5-10 year development cycle. Well, it did, because development means taking an idea and developing it. So if this idea started 10 years ago, then it was developed into another idea that developed further. That is quite literally the strict progression of development. And there are examples of things that take an extremely long time to come out and were extremely mismanaged that don't even come close to how fantastic the final product of Final Fantasy XV actually was, especially when it comes to the fluidity of the combat and the story flow in general, especially with side quests. Not actually the main story, but I mean the world building itself felt very good. And of course, you look at things like Duke Nukem Forever, that was, I would like to say mismanaged, but that doesn't seem to fucking cover it. That does not cover it at all. That was another beast entirely. What I'm getting at is that the story needed fleshing out, and there is no level of mismanagement that could have stopped other teams just coming in and filling in some of these blanks. Now, I really want to emphasize how important this was to have in the original game, rather than the 6 months later, 2 years later, however long. As I was saying, that people are coming into this game, and Final Fantasy XV was the beginning of trying to get people into the franchise. It was the precursor, it was the water boy to Final Fantasy VII, the remake. They are reinventing their most popular game. To this day, most people who are Final Fantasy fans will say Final Fantasy VII was their favourite game. This was the setup to make probably one of the biggest financial investments and one of the biggest financial payoffs in Square Enix's entire history as a company. But falling flat of that just means that Final Fantasy VII, the remake, is going to suffer. People that would have thought they were coming into the single-player experience for amazing storytelling, they didn't get that, and what's that done? It's just meant they're not going to buy the remake. Speaking of favourite Final Fantasies, Final Fantasy X is my favourite game of all time. Not just Final Fantasies, but I mean any game ever. And for some people, that is the equivalent of me saying the Waffen SS were pretty nice people, and labelled me as someone who doesn't enjoy Final Fantasies and doesn't enjoy gaming in general, and I probably smell, and I'm probably bad in bed. Some of that may be true. I'll leave that up to you to decide which ones, but I smell lovely today. I want to frame this argument, or debate, around Final Fantasy X right now, but to prove something to people, as I am extremely into storytelling, and how it's done effectively. Take this clip, for instance, from Game of Thrones.
What is it?
We took Casterly Rock.
That's very good to hear. Isn't it?
You'll want to discuss this amongst yourselves.
You will stay. All my allies are gone. They've been taken from me while I've been sitting here on this island.
You still have the largest armies.
Who won't be able to eat because Cersei has taken all the food from the Reach?
Core Grey Worm and the Unsullied Banner. We still have enough ships to carry the Dothraki to the mainland. Commit to the blockade of King's Landing. We have a plan. It's still the right plan.
The right plan! Your strategy has lost us Dawn, the Iron Islands, and the Reach.
If I have underestimated our enemies...
Our enemies? Your family, you mean? Perhaps you don't want to hurt them after all.
As a viewer, we know what was said between the cut and the re-explaining. It would not only take more time to get to the gut punch for the character, but it's unnecessary, as we already know the reaction. Now what we need is a counter-action following the reaction, and getting to that faster leads to better pacing and better storytelling. So, using this logic, I'll break down a key plot point in Final Fantasy XV that, unlike Lunafreya, a character who had been really fucking important, so important to the whole plot, that derailing for a whole mission seemed completely fine, or 2 for some of the worst missions in the game. I believe it was chapter 14 and has been reworked since, but still, as I said, I'm talking about it as perspective of release. Yes, I am talking about Prompto. It turns out that Prompto is an MT. Now, what an MT is, from what I understand, is someone who is born of the demons. They are a mixture between Magitech and demons, and yeah, it leads to this moment where he opens the door with his hand thing, like I guess a barcode, and
It's coming from within.
And then everyone around them explaining, oh, we fucking love you, you know you would never betray us, blah blah, which would have felt a lot more impactful if we had seen how Prompto had actually reacted to Noctis knocking him off the train. Imagine, he's someone who was born of the enemy, not betraying his friends, even though technically it's quite within his power. For him to feel like Noctis might have hurt him or betrayed him really would have torn into both of them, and would have made some amazing clashing of interests, and for later, for that actual development, coming out and saying I'm an MT, it would have made for a lot more impactful imagery and storytelling that Noctis actually was the one that fucked up, and it wasn't actually Prompto being a different thing or a different person born of a different place that caused him to be attacked by Noctis. It was blah, blah, blah. But it was like Arden pulled him in to try and set up this big moment, this big reveal, and it just fell completely flat because it just came out of fucking nowhere. And it was literally, yeah, we know you won't betray us. And as quick as that, it was gone. It never brought up again. Like what the fuck? Being a mechanized demon creature, whatever the fuck he actually is, it's not something you just bring up and never talk about again.
Unless you'd rather not be.
It's so mind-boggling, literally how out of fucking nowhere it comes, and just goes away again. It really spoke to me of rushed plot. A lot of the time, towards the end of a game, there is the ending of 2 plots, especially in, let's take a good little thing, for example, Soma. If you have played Soma, there is a part in the game where, quite literally, the main enemies of the game basically say, come into this room and click a button for me. That's that plot resolved. And a lot of writers get to this point where they've written stuff in to sort of complement the main plot. It's like a main plot that goes alongside the main plot. And they feel like they have to give both good, shocking endings or twists, when that doesn't actually have to happen. You can actually leave that story completely alone after a while, as long as it serves a purpose, which Prompto getting knocked off the train, us finding his internal thoughts out, blah blah blah, would have been the actual climax to that story once he reveals to everyone he's an MT and how he felt. But what we actually got was none of that, because we didn't see anything of Prompto. We didn't hear anything till he came up again. We went to rescue him. Boom, bish, bosh. You're an MT. We still trust you. Over and done with. Can you not see how it really doesn't make sense to have that subplot next to this main story? And to just come out of nowhere and go nowhere, rather than coming out of nowhere and then leading into something more important, or having something more important lead up to it, so when it comes out of, quote, nowhere, it actually has some form of backstory or some form of thing that has led up to it to being an important plot point. It's kind of like a side story starts differently from a main story. It doesn't start at the very beginning. It can start at any point as long as it gets resolved adequately. So the argument that it would have brought nothing to Noctis' story is honestly plain silly to me. Having a clash of characters, especially amongst the main cast, is fantastic. It makes and breeds diversity. And for something like with Luna, I wish they could have done at least something like flashbacks with us on the Hills of Tenebrae playing with Luna. Because these kind of things, maybe with the main gang we got some of them because they were always around us, but there were a lot of characters in the game where we just never got anything, which Luna was a really good example of that. I love the three main lads that come along with Noctis because I feel like there was a lot there. There could have been more, but there still was a lot, and I don't like to harp on about Luna, but honestly, one of the biggest failings in the game was her entire fucking character. The reason it needed to go the way I'm saying it did, and I know some people will say, oh, you are saying it has to go this way. For a good story, it kind of does. The player needs to feel engaged. We need to at least fall in love with Noctis enough to understand why Luna is important to us as a player. If we don't like her, if we don't fall in love with her, it doesn't matter as much as long as we care about the main character enough to realize that he wants to be in a relationship with her, he loves her, so you will do anything to protect her, because you are role-playing effectively as Noctis. So the moment she is killed, we feel that pain, that feeling of an ocean around us like punching in a dream, trying to fight our way to the one person we loved before they're taken from us. All that rage turned into anger and vengeful thoughts against Arden. For doing that, a character is just propelled astronomically from what she would have been. And we need to care about them both. We can't just care about one. Honestly, that underwater scene is a very good allegory for how it actually feels when you are losing someone. It is that feeling of no matter what you do, no matter how hard you push, no matter how hard you swing your fists, you will never move an inch because it's out of your control. And things spiraling out of your control is very, very difficult to comprehend. And it was a very good way of showing that and bringing that across. Not just being quite literally reverted to a child. And even when he panicked and started doing everything he could to get towards the one woman he loved, he still was acting like a child. He couldn't face it. He couldn't react to it, and I felt horrible for him. But I didn't care that Luna was out of the story, because she was never there to begin with. Now, don't get me wrong, my favourite game has issues. Final Fantasy X has so many issues, especially with the different versions of the game that were sent around the world, some without the Dark Aeons, without Anima, without the Magi Sisters. These were all things that I got to play with as a kid, and I'm so thankful that they were in the game, along with Penance, along with the Omega. There was so many amazing things that were cut from other versions of the game, so that I can understand why some people didn't feel like they got a full experience. But in a modern setting, those things would have been cut, but for everyone. They would have been cut and sold as DLC, and this is something I don't think people understand. Final Fantasy X got absolutely railed about the different editions in different countries, which all that stuff being DLC would have been a problem for everyone because the game would not have felt finished. And as I said, DLC is not the problem here. DLC is good, and when the fundamental game feels incomplete, the DLC is always going to feel like it was the problem. Which then, when that DLC leads to you feeling more connection to your characters, other people view it from the outside that aren't either willing to buy the DLC, can't afford the DLC, or just don't want to play the game anymore, feel like they were cheated out of connections that should have been in the base game. I honestly felt more connected to Cindy than I ever did to Luna. That little grease monkey was fucking adorable, and I loved her character. And there were several other reasons why I may have loved her character, but I'm not going to say them. I think showing you would probably be a lot easier.
Drop it.
Let me know if you want me to give you a hand with the waxing.
So to boil down the argument to its most basic form, it's like going out for dinner. The starter is your demos and press release. The game itself is the main course. Your dessert is DLC. And the rocking end of the night is those extra bits of DLC, like the car's paint jobs, the weapon paint jobs, DLC like Noctis in a funny hat. What I'm trying to say is, I really like the idea of the end of my night being me and Noctis in a funny hat. Yeah. So when DLC feels like it's part of the main course that's just been slowly brought to you throughout the night, well, fucking Christ, the poor waiter, and you would want your money back. Noctis is your steak, but the potatoes and veg, aka the side characters, also need equal amount of love or they won't complement that steak, and that will ruin the entire meal. Now, this isn't always the case, but I'm going to show you something that I personally think a lot of people will agree with, even the people who are already thumbs down the video. They've fucking sent hitmen to my house. They're doing everything they can to make sure that I never speak again. I think that this is something even they will have to agree with. This is concerning Arden. Arden, if you are to play the game without any form of outside information, without watching the film or the anime, if you're obviously a new fan to the series and you just played the game, he probably feels like a really fucking boring villain that really didn't do much. If you are someone who likes Final Fantasy and went and looked up the lore to Arden, his backstory and everything, you would actually probably say he is one of the best villains in any Final Fantasy game, and any game ever. He is a fucking tragic villain, and he is so methodical and genius that it is absolutely incredible. During the main game, the first time you meet him, you know he's off. He's got the fucking wacky hair, he's got that big villain vibe, and he's just come off a boat with those clothes on. And Final Fantasy shorthand for that's a villain. Thinking of you, Seymour, you massive cunt. Now, people have theorised that Arden was part of the Lucius family. He was given the power to take away the Star Scourge by Bahamut and the rest of the gods. The first king eventually ostracised him, which led to Arden actually giving in to the Star Scourge inside him, and he was betrayed by the king. Arden became an oracle to heal people, and he was taking the Star Scourge out of people like Luna was. But unlike Luna, he never died to get rid of it out of the world. He kept it inside him and used it as his power. Which, from my understanding, the Star Scourge is actually something that came about after Ifrit rebelled against the other gods and decided to fight against humanity. And dying would have taken whatever Star Scourge he had taken out of people, a bit like, I guess you were taking a virus out of people, and then dying basically kills it off. The Star Scourge is making demons, but Arden denied his fate, and he lived with it inside himself, making him a thrall to the darkness, as Luna calls him. Now, a lot of this is theory, but that's why people think Luna was trying to take the darkness from Arden, effectively pulling a Constantine, and by the end of the game, banishing the evil by absolving it, which, if you're thinking what the fuck is this neckbeard going on about? Well, there's another one of Final Fantasy XV's huge issues. The line of Lucius, who Arden is, what the crystals are, and why they gave us a 2001 A Space Odyssey Kubrick moment with Noctis was just hardly explained at all in the main story. A lot of this stuff comes from side things like the Book of Oracles, and it went unresolved even in the DLC. And normally DLC, in a way, is meant to kind of either fill these gaps or give some form of context to things. If it wasn't in the main game at all, which it should have been. I'm not saying that all of this stuff should have been answered in DLC, and not all of it needed to be answered. But what I'm saying is more effort, even if it was in DLC, should have been put to actually making this story, because it is a great story, out, easily understandable, easy to digest, and actually focus more on Arden as a character. A lot of the time, it felt like things just sort of happened to Noctis, and they were hard to explain, they just sort of happened to him. He was just sort of a catalyst. And with what it felt like, there was just no rhyme or reason, and a lot of the unsolved plot just sort of went by with no form of ever coming back up again. When unresolved things come about in gaming, normally DLC is the way of getting about it again. But a bit like with the Prompto subplot, like, what the fuck even went on there? It felt like such a segue from what was potentially an amazing story that was going on the side, to his really kind of boring and out of nowhere story. Honestly, if you actually look at the story of Arden as a villain, there is so much more they could have done, so much more they could have told us about, and they would never have had to make any of this random side stuff. This segue really did come out of nowhere, like a lot of things, and it just didn't feel right. Not to mention, a lot of people even think that Lucius and the Azunias were actually swapped around. Arden took over the name because he was actually of royal descent, and the kings, who basically were not chosen by the crystals, were the people who are descendants of Noctis. And Noctis is basically the first person who has been a good enough person to be accepted by them, because the family stole their name and became the new kings. They basically stole royalty, and they were not chosen. The first king timeline had to be worthy of the power of the crystal, and none of them were, which is why the ring, from what I understand, was actually doing so much damage to the wielders. Arden is a tragic character. He was betrayed. He was a healer. And everything inside him, all of the evil he took out of people, it controlled him. And it was really horrible to think how of many of these interactions, like the one with Gentiana in the train, was due to the story that they actually had together beforehand. I honestly think that Final Fantasy XV, as a game, could have been based around Arden alone. He could have been the main character. I think it would have been really interesting to see the game from his perspective. There's a lot of times when, in the train especially, he does say, that's the face you wore on that day, and then she touches his lips to shut him up. Probably because she doesn't want Noctis necessarily knowing that they were the ones that gave him the powers to get as strong as he's got. And a lot of this is told in subtext, which is completely fine. Honestly, spelling everything out right is one of the worst things a story can do. Never actually tell what you can't show, and never actually put on screen what you really, really would like people to dig into. You have to put little things like breadcrumbs, and then the lore community will always dig that shit to absolutely the nth degree. Quite literally, there was a post, because of the Battlefield Easter eggs that have just come out, of maybe the painting is Morse code. What? These people are fucking mad, but they have solved some extremely complicated Easter eggs because these people are dedicated. And a lot of the time, those are the people who are going to make your content more interesting. In terms of, like, Destiny, people like Bife and Joker and all those people who do lore content, it really does make the game feel a lot more full for the people who weren't as fulfilled by an amazing story, or maybe they were, but they wanted to know more. And in the terms of Final Fantasy, a lot of subtext stuff sometimes goes a little too far, and a lot of really good story just never comes to light and is all left to theory. Now, this story is amazing. What's kind of going on at the end with all the adding different endings and stuff, all that fucking ruins it in my opinion. I really think it ruins it to have a happy ending. The story is sad. The villain is sad. And the reason the villain is sad is because the family that you are playing as has wronged him. Or the family who you basically were pretending to be, I guess, has wronged him. And he only needed to do one thing. And that wasn't make the entire world into demons. Arden wanted vengeance, and in a way he was completely justified to want it. He is an absolutely amazing character, and what makes him also amazing is the fact that he won. That's right, a lot of people don't seem to understand this. The Arden won. Ifrit was the one that wanted the Star Scourge to stay on Earth and destroy all of humanity. Arden really didn't care. He was only using it as a means to an end to get revenge on the gods and the family that betrayed him. And him becoming powerful and basically getting to the point and upgrading, I guess, Noctis to the point where he was strong enough to wield the Ring of Lucius, that was the point that he knew Noctis would have to die in order to kill him. That's what I think people don't look at it as. He knew that getting Noctis powerful enough was the way to get his win. And it worked. Noctis died. Ignoring all of the happy ending bullshit, Noctis is dead. He died to kill Arden, and that was Arden's plan all along. You can see it through the way you play the game. He is always there to guide you to the next place where the god will be, or to where a chosen king died and their weapon is there. He's always there to guide him and get him stronger. He even completely lets him just sit in the crystal, giving him tips and helpful advice. He honestly absolutely nailed his vengeance, and I don't think anyone can take that away from him. Now, a lot of this stuff is told in subtext, which can be absolutely fine. I honestly don't believe everything needs to be spelt out. Like with adding the good and bad endings, I personally liked the ending sort of being left up to interpretation, even though the entire point, in my opinion, of the story is that Noctis is meant to die, and that is the entire point of Arden. And it is a nice kind of tragic story with a tragic beginning and a tragic ending, that someone fucked up, made Arden the villain he is, and Noctis had to pay with his life. And once again, it is the case of Luna and Noctis. In a way, they are kind of polar opposites. That Noctis had all of this freedom, all of this independence, and it made him seem very arrogant, when Luna was a prisoner for most of her life. And that does hark back to when Stella and all that was in development, but still. Luna, as a character, was effectively never making her own choices. She was never deciding when she was going to do something, and Noctis was. Noctis's first proper choice, I would say, in this entire game, other than, like, that wasn't selfish, I guess. Even his choice to marry Luna, in a way, he didn't not want to marry Luna. Why wouldn't you? She's beautiful, she's kind, she's a caring, loving person, and they were good friends. So why wouldn't he want to marry her? There is no way he would just go, nah, fuck that. It is very much in his ideas, I guess, or his ideals as a person, to take things for granted and be a bit selfish, which is very well put together during the entire depression phase that Noctis goes through after Luna's death. Like, obviously Ignis has a go at him saying... Gladio has a go at him saying, Ignis lost his eyes. Why are you moping around? And Ignis obviously rightfully kind of goes, I know I lost my eyes, but he lost his heart, basically. You have to think of that. He did lose, in a way, something which was extremely precious to him. And it harps back to the idea that Noctis is still very young. Luna and Noctis were both very young for the decisions and story that they were going through. The trials that Noctis is going through as a person, I don't think he ever really weighed the good, bad, and the outcomes that could be possible with the type of story he was in, I guess. The whole idea of war is very shocking to most people. A lot of the time, when you look back at history and look at the way people interpret, especially people that collect or are makers of weapons of war, you see regret in their eyes. You see that feeling of, what the fuck have I done? And when you are someone who is a higher up especially, I don't think you necessarily see the blips as people. You know, you point an army in one direction, my army won, yours lost, I'm victorious. You never see the dead people, you never see the fields of blood. And that is what Noctis for the first time actually saw. And this is what Arden, in a way, saw, which changed him. He saw that no matter what, he is going to be fucked over. And he wants to take the people who did it, even if it's their relatives, down with him. And he did succeed. As I said, he succeeded. He did. And Noctis had to choose to pay that price. To save the world, to save everyone, he had to make the same sacrifice and the same proper choice, the first non-selfish choice in his life, to sacrifice himself for the greater good. And once again, like Luna, she had to make the first proper choice in her life, which differently, obviously, because the choice wasn't really hers to begin with. A lot of her story is she hadn't had the ability to choose. She was always just forced into the situation of Oracle, forced into the situation of being a healer, effectively. And she was always there for everyone, and she was very much a puppet. And Noctis, being the polar opposite, meeting that same exact conclusion of choice to give up your life to save everyone. I think that is wonderful, and it's great storytelling. And it means that the ending is bittersweet, which is one of the best ways to end a story. Sometimes making everything absolutely perfect is one of the worst things you can do. I hate when stories and developers and fans especially will try to pull every end possible together to make the ending happy. Because the thing is, while Final Fantasy is a fantasy, a lot of its stories and a lot of its derivatives, I guess, are based in reality. There is no happy ending in reality. There is no real happy ending. Someone suffers if someone wins. And that is the truth of it. There is always a 50-50 chance. And I'm going to put a clip here once again because I think this really hits the spot of how a good ending or how a good narrative, especially about war, affects people. And once again, it's going to be from Doctor Who, and I know I compare everything to Doctor Who, but it has got some amazing writing. And it's this clip that I think really does pull things together for me, as not only someone who likes to review and look at games and TV shows and films, but as someone that likes to examine stories. I think this is a lot of this time what people don't put into perspective. And I'll just play the clip now, and then I'll put my thoughts in afterwards.
So let me ask you a question about this brave new world of yours. When you've killed all the bad guys, and when it's all perfect and just and fair, when you have finally got it exactly the way you want it, what are you going to do with the people like you? The troublemakers. How are you going to protect your glorious revolution from the next one?
We'll win.
Oh, will you? Well, maybe you will win. But nobody wins for long. The wheel just keeps turning. So come on. Break the cycle.
Why are you still talking?
Because I want to get you to see, and I'm almost there.
Do you know what I see, Doctor? A box. A box with everything I need. A 50% chance.
For us too.
And we're off! Fingers on buzzers! Are you feeling lucky? Are you ready to play the game? Who's gonna be quickest? Who's gonna be luckiest?
This is not a game!
No, it's not a game, sweetheart, and I mean that most sincerely.
Why are you doing this?
Yes, I'd quite like to know that too. You set this up, why?
Because it's not a game, Kate. This is a scale model of war. Every war ever fought right there in front of you. Because it's always the same. When you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. You don't know whose children are going to scream and burn. How many hearts will be broken? How many lives shattered? How much blood will spill until everybody does what they were always going to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk! Listen to me, listen. I just want you to think. Do you know what thinking is? It's just a fancy word for changing your mind.
I will not change my mind.
Then you will die stupid. Alternatively, you could step away from that box. You could walk right out of that door, and you could stand your revolution down.
No. I'm not stopping this, Doctor. I started it. I will not stop it. You think they'll let me go after what I've done?
You're all the same, you screaming kids. You know that? Look at me. I'm unforgivable. Well, here's the unforeseeable. I forgive you. After all you've done, I forgive you.
You don't understand. You will never understand.
I don't understand? Are you kidding me? Of course I understand. I mean, do you call this a war, this funny little thing? This is not a war. I fought in a bigger war than you will ever know. I did worse things than you could ever imagine. And when I close my eyes, I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count. And you know what you do with all that pain? Shall I tell you where you put it? You hold it tight. Till it burns your hand. And you say this: no one else will ever have to live like this. No one else will ever have to feel this pain. Not on my watch. Thank you.
Not only is the scenes impactful emotionally, I don't think that's the main point. You are looking at a man who did at one point push a button that destroyed 2 entire species. And that is the choice that is presented there. And there's a line here that really, really sticks true with all of this. When you start a war, effectively, you have no idea how it's going to go, no matter how right you feel. Which, that is me sort of taking liberties with what he said, but that is sort of the truth of it. You don't know. No matter how righteous, no matter how right this war feels, there is someone who is going to die who had nothing to do with whatever wrong you are trying to right. There is going to be a lot of senseless violence over trying to right something that was wronged. And that is kind of what Arden is as a story point, as a character, as a thing, as an amalgamation of the Star Scourge and evil. He isn't actually necessarily evil. He's just trying his best to right the wrong that was done to him, and he doesn't really care who he takes down or who suffers because of his actions. He literally almost takes down the entire world, and he kills what is effectively an innocent 20-year-old something boy and stabs a 24-year-old woman because of his tragic story. And that is really, really important. It is incredibly important that when you look at this story, you realise that it is a story of tragedies. It's not a story of happiness. And that's okay. It's okay to be like that. But you need to put forward this stuff. You need to make sure it is put forward in such a way that it's not left up to interpretation completely. Because then things like this adding a happy ending happens, and it completely takes away from the original point of the story, in my opinion. It's like with Final Fantasy X. The second installment of the game completely negates the impactful emotional ending of Final Fantasy X, because once again, it is a bittersweet story. Tidus, the entire time, was dead. He wasn't there. He was a spirit like Auron was. Auron didn't tell him, even when Tidus finds out that he is a spirit. He doesn't say to Tidus, oh yeah, you're one too, because you came here through the same methods I did. He only finds out and knows as he's about to leave the one woman he loves. And even though they can't feel each other, they embrace in what is effectively a hug, and it is so fucking harsh and tragic to think that they fell in love, and the one thing that's separating them is the fact that people committed problems and sin was born. Their tragic backstory has nothing to do with them. They were the children who burnt and died, effectively, because of someone else's war. And that is really tragic. That is tragic. But it's good. It's a good ending. And to sour that by making it, oh no, it didn't actually happen fully the way you think it is, blah blah blah. I do think that the only ending I ever accepted from 10-2 is when Yuna gets closure. Now, I wouldn't have even minded this in 10, where Yuna goes to the Far Plains and meets with Tidus, because the Far Plains is effectively the bridge between the spirit world and the human world. And that, once again, is horrible to think, that she went there just to see him, to know that he's dead. That is... man, that's fucked and horrible, but it's good. Sometimes being fucked is good. Hell yeah. I'm gonna leave that in. That wasn't my intention. I was gonna edit that out, but you know what? No, that came out completely right. Sometimes getting fucked is good, even if it's the emotional type of fucked. Now, the reason I've explained all this in the order I have, and it might sound a bit like I'm trailing off from my original point, is because I wanted you to know where I stand with the opinions of good and bad endings. I personally don't think they always have to exist, and a lot of time a multi-narrative ending really does ruin a story. A bit like when a side story feels like it has to have a really impactful ending rather than just meh endings. That can happen, but you just have to do it in the right way. You can't unveil something as big as Prompto being an MT and then have a meh ending at the same time. You have to have it make some form of cohesive sense, which is why it would have made a lot more sense if Prompto had his story overlap in a way of Noctis maybe betraying him on the train, him pondering over that for ages, or maybe you somehow finding that out that he went through that through other means in the game. And yeah, it, you know, that does have its own connotations to it, so yeah. But what I mean is having that character adversity, having that sort of opinion clash really would have improved that entire moment, and it wouldn't have felt like such a crap moment. And that is the same with what I feel happens at the actual ending of the game. While the ending is fucking fantastic, one of the main reasons it's left open to such interpretation is just because the story was not brought forward enough to the common audience. If you go and research it afterwards, the ending makes complete fucking sense. You're like, oh my god, Arden won, Noctis died, and that's why they're together. They can only be together when they sleep, which was the metaphor of them falling asleep on the throne, and why once the game ends, the actual title screen is a picture of Noctis and Luna on the throne asleep. It's fucking tragic, but it's amazingly good. But that needed to be put across in the initial story, rather than being left up to interpretation and fans to put together videos explaining this to people. Arden, as I said, one of my favourite villains. And, in my opinion, if this story had been told correctly, I actually think Final Fantasy XV would be my second most favourite game in the series. I really, really do. The theories are endless, and I feel no matter what I say, some people will never agree that there could have been a better storyline, especially with the amount of development that went into the game. And that is fine. Honestly, all I've ever wanted to see is this game and series grow. I love this series, and it's become amazing, especially with the combat and with everything, just everything, the characters. It's so amazing, and how far it's come is absolutely beautiful. They are doing everything with Next Generation that I think they should be doing, other than the DLC with a linear, really not well-told story. I love games. I love Final Fantasy, and honestly, that has been my entire life. It defines me. It has defined the person I am today, like nothing else could. It has shaped my entire narrative. It has shaped almost everything I write myself personally when it comes to fantasy, and the way I interpret stories and how I pay attention to stories is all thanks to Final Fantasy. I am, today, basically an amalgamation of stories. A lot of the things I write, you will see where I get my inspiration from. And you will see a lot of things I do are based off of things like Doctor Who and Final Fantasy, because they stick with you. They stick with you, and that magic is very hard to capture. And I think Final Fantasy 15 captured it in such a good way. But the only time you know about this amazingness is if you go and read up all of the backstory. And that just doesn't work with a Final Fantasy. It works for things like Dark Souls, because this is a comparison I see a lot. People always say things like Dark Souls don't outwardly tell a story. Yes, they don't. But also, the fact is that I completed Final Fantasy 15 at level 39. Level 39. Just think about that for a second. I wanted to see how hard the game would be on the highest difficulty at the time, which was normal, and I completed it without being even half the recommended level for the ending. That should never happen. With Dark Souls, no matter what you do, if you are a bit of a noob, you are going to get your fucking balls smashed in with a mallet. There is so much difference between the difficulty levels of a Final Fantasy game, and Final Fantasy has always been primarily narrative driven, when Dark Souls has always had a background narrative, gameplay first. And now that Final Fantasy wants to be gameplay first, it feels good, combat feels good, but you've got a fan base which expects story from you. So changing the formula doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. Especially considering the magic that Final Fantasy has captured with their audience from generation to generation. To continue it the way they are, being mainly a heavy combat-focused game but with a little bit of narrative, I really do think that's going to do the entire franchise a disservice. As always, I really do think that this is an open conversation, and I'd really love for people to either question my theories or question anything that I have said, or any points that I have basically said wrong. Anything. Please leave it in the comments. I would love to hear it. I don't want hatred from this. Not on me, but not on anyone else either. I don't want people to hate each other over their likes and dislikes. I want people to be able to talk about what they don't like, and then be able to actually sit down and work something out. Not saying that we have any sway over what Square Enix does. No, we don't. But if enough people were to say something is wrong here, then quite possibly people would look into it. It's happening all the time. Look at Battlefield. Even though Battlefield right now is literally kind of becoming dead because they fucked up and didn't listen to their audience. And then there's things like Destiny 2, that they're trying so hard to listen to their key audience now, because they realised they were going in the wrong direction. And I honestly feel, especially with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, this is a very, extremely delicate time for the series. If Final Fantasy VII, the remake, if the story is done badly, or is left 90% up to fucking interpretation, which Final Fantasy 15 wasn't 90% obviously, but if it is left up to interpretation, a bit like Final Fantasy 15 was, I think a lot of people will be annoyed. Now, when it comes to things like Genesis and, you know, all of the planetary life stuff, all of that isn't necessarily outright explained. Sephiroth never sits down and actually explains to you what all of it is. There is a lot of stuff told via, you know, the world. but there was still a very central narrative there, which I do feel the central narrative people try and say Final Fantasy 15 has is it's Noctis' story and growth. Yes, it really is. It really, really is, definitely. But at the same time, you can't have that without having good side character growth. It just doesn't work. You need side characters to be growing alongside the main, and when these things come to light, like with Prompto, everything like that, if there has been no setup, there will be no payoff. There is just no physical way of doing it. Imagine if you started up Final Fantasy 15, and the very first thing you see is Noctis coming out the crystal. Would you have been like, oh cool, he's old. That didn't look like the trailer. There would be no setup for it. You wouldn't have any clue what's going on. And it's the same with anything. You need to set up your stories. And that is, I think, a huge issue that people have with Final Fantasy 15. It's what my biggest issue with Final Fantasy 15 is stories that were just started and ended in the same fucking cutscene. Stories that were started and ended in an anime or in Kingsglaive that ended in the game but had no prior knowledge in-game of it. So if anyone went into it like I chose to, you wouldn't have any clue until you've watched the film. But yeah, I'm going to end this here because it's probably getting very long, and I feel like I've harped on the same points over and over again as much as I can to explain them the best I can. And I know people say one of my biggest problems with these is I repeat myself a lot, and it's because it's very difficult for me, especially to sort of read scripts, and because dyslexia, so I'm reading my own script, which was written by a dyslexic, read by a dyslexic, so sometimes I will repeat things. I try to cut them out as best I can, but yeah, I'm hoping that doesn't affect the video quality too much, and I hope you guys in some way have enjoyed this, and I would, as I said, love to hear from people. I would love to hear people's opinions, and I would really like for this to sort of be a little standpoint, I guess, for talking about this game for me, because I do love this game. Now that I've replayed it, I remember just how magic everything feels and how much I love it. But I do think that not talking about the problems really doesn't help the industry. Turning your back and not looking these issues in the face really doesn't help anyone. But as always, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Peace out, and have a good one.